I never imagined the man who once whispered promises beside me would someday stand in a courtroom and claim I was unfit to be a mother. When I married Rowan Hale, I believed love was enough to survive anything. I believed apologies mattered. I believed patience could heal cruelty. By the time our second child was born, belief had become survival, and survival had become silence. Rowan did not hit me, not at first. He mastered something worse. He erased me slowly, in front of others, with jokes that weren't jokes, with doubts disguised as concern, with stories told so confidently people assumed they were true. He would forget to come home and blame me for not reminding him. He would miss birthdays and claim I turned the children against him. He would scream behind closed doors and smile in public, and when I flinched, he'd laugh and say I was dramatic. I stayed longer than I should have, because I thought leaving would break the children. I didn't realize staying was already breaking them quietly. The night I left was ordinary. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just Rowan standing in the kitchen, calm, telling me I was lucky he tolerated me and that no court would ever choose me over him. He said it casually, like discussing weather. That was the moment I knew the marriage was over, but the war had just begun. After the divorce, Rowan transformed. Online, he became the devoted father. In reality, he missed visitations, returned the kids hungry, and interrogated them about my life like they were informants. When I asked him to stick to the custody schedule, he accused me of controlling behavior. When I documented missed pickups, he accused me of harassment. Every boundary I set became a weapon he claimed I used against him. I worked 2 jobs, not because I wanted to, but because stability was the only language the world respected. I packed lunches, attended school meetings, stayed up late helping with homework, and held my children when they cried after visits with their father. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. Inside was a petition for full custody. Rowan claimed I was neglectful, unstable, financially irresponsible, and emotionally abusive. He claimed I poisoned the children against him. He claimed he feared for their safety. I remember sitting on the floor, the papers shaking in my hands, my youngest asking if we were moving again. Rowan hadn't just filed for custody. He had declared open season on my motherhood. The lies were elaborate. He submitted statements from acquaintances I barely knew. Screenshots taken out of context. A carefully curated version of reality where he was the victim and I was the threat. He told people I drank excessively, that I left the kids alone, that I screamed at them. None of it was true, but truth doesn't defend itself unless you force it to. The first hearing felt like drowning. Rowan arrived in a tailored suit, confident, shaking hands with his lawyer like this was a business deal. I arrived exhausted, holding a folder of documents and years of swallowed pain. When his attorney spoke, they painted me as volatile, bitter, unstable. Rowan sat there, eyes downcast, performing remorse. I realized then that he wasn't trying to win custody because he wanted the kids. He was trying to punish me for leaving. Control had always been his addiction. What Rowan didn't know was that I had learned something during our marriage. When someone lies consistently, they leave patterns. And patterns leave evidence. I stopped reacting and started recording. I pulled phone logs showing unanswered calls during his visitation times. School records proving I attended every meeting while he attended none. Medical records showing I was the parent listed for emergencies. Messages where he contradicted himself, saying he couldn't take the kids due to work, then claiming I denied him access. I requested reports from teachers documenting the children's anxiety after visits. I gathered financial records showing consistent support from me and sporadic, delayed payments from him. Each document felt small alone, but together they told a story Rowan couldn't control. The turning point came when Rowan overplayed his hand. He submitted a statement claiming I had left the children unattended overnight to go drinking. He included a date, a time, a location. It would have destroyed me if it were true. But that night, I had been working an overnight shift. On camera, badge logged, supervisor signed. I subpoenaed the footage. When the judge watched it, the room shifted. Rowan's lawyer tried to recover, but lies collapse differently than mistakes. Once one crack appears, the structure weakens. The judge asked Rowan to clarify. He stammered, changed details, claimed confusion. The calm confidence vanished. And in that moment, for the first time, people saw what I had lived with for years. Then came the witnesses Rowan never expected. The neighbor who testified that Rowan routinely dropped the kids off late and agitated. The teacher who described one child flinching at raised voices. The counselor who explained the children's stress markers and how stability came from one parent consistently showing up. I didn't attack Rowan. I didn't insult him. I simply told the truth, calmly, steadily, without embellishment. I explained why I left. How control escalates when it's challenged. How my children deserved peace more than performance. The judge listened. Really listened. When the ruling came, it felt unreal. Rowan's petition for full custody was denied. My primary custody was affirmed. His visitation was reduced and supervised until he completed counseling. The judge cited false statements, manipulation, and concern over emotional harm. Rowan didn't look at me as we left. He didn't need to. The silence was louder than any victory speech. Outside the courthouse, my children held my hands, unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened, only knowing they were going home. Justice didn't arrive with applause. It arrived quietly, in the form of bedtime routines uninterrupted, laughter returning to our home, and the absence of fear when the phone rang. Rowan still tells people his version. He always will. But the difference now is that it no longer controls my life. I learned that surviving a toxic person doesn't mean becoming loud. It means becoming undeniable. And when he tried to take my children to prove his power, he exposed his lies instead. The court didn't save me. The truth did. And for the first time in years, my children sleep knowing tomorrow belongs to us. The quiet war after the ruling. Winning in court did not end the battle. It changed its shape. The judgment protected my children, but it bruised his ego, and wounded egos look for hidden ways to bleed you. The first weeks after the ruling were deceptively calm. Messages stopped. Deadlines were met. Supervised visits were scheduled with professional politeness. I almost believed he had accepted the outcome. That belief lasted exactly 23 days. Then the small things began. Anonymous complaints to school administrators questioning my mental stability. Emails sent to mutual acquaintances suggesting I had manipulated the system. Subtle posts online about fathers being silenced by vindictive women. None of it directly named me, but all of it pointed. I learned quickly that when someone loses control publicly, they try to regain it privately. I stopped hoping for change and doubled down on protection. I documented again. Not because I wanted another court fight, but because peace requires preparation when history repeats itself. The children adjusted faster than I did. They laughed more freely. They slept through the night. One of them stopped chewing their nails. Trauma leaves quietly when safety stays consistently. That was how I knew the ruling was right, even before the law confirmed it. The mask slips in public. The exposure didn't come from me. It came from his inability to stop talking. At a school event, he arrived late, irritated by the presence of a supervisor. He argued loudly, insisting the restriction was unnecessary. Other parents noticed. Staff noticed. He spoke about rights instead of responsibilities, about fairness instead of care. The contrast was sharp. When someone spends years controlling the narrative, they forget how transparent frustration looks without an audience they can manipulate. Later, a mutual acquaintance reached out quietly and apologized. They admitted they had believed the stories at first. Then they watched the behavior themselves. Lies survive only in darkness. Once light appears, they panic. I did not celebrate his unraveling. I observed it. Detachment became my armor. The children find their voice. Healing does not announce itself. It shows up in small moments. A child asking to invite friends over again. A child saying they feel safe. A child expressing anger without fear of punishment. Therapy sessions shifted from crisis management to emotional literacy. I learned how deeply children internalize tension, how they blame themselves for adult cruelty. We unlearned that together. I made mistakes. I apologized when I did. That mattered more than perfection ever could. Meanwhile, attempts to provoke me continued. Late-night emails demanding changes already denied by court. Accusations framed as concern. Each message read like bait. I stopped responding emotionally and started responding minimally, formally, and only when necessary. Silence starves manipulators. The final attempt. The last attempt was the boldest and the weakest. A motion filed claiming noncompliance with visitation terms. He expected exhaustion to make me careless. Instead, he met documentation so thorough it bordered on embarrassing. Check-in logs, supervisor notes, timelines, patterns. The court dismissed the motion swiftly. This time, the language was sharper. Warnings were issued, boundaries reinforced, consequences outlined. When someone repeatedly abuses the system eventually notices. Walking out of that hearing, I felt something unfamiliar. Not relief. Closure. What survival became. Survival became stability. Stability became confidence. Confidence became peace. I stopped measuring my worth by how convincingly I could defend myself against lies. I measured it by the environment my children grew in. They no longer asked if we were safe. They assumed it. That assumption was everything. I learned that justice is not loud revenge. It is quiet consistency. It is choosing truth even when performance would be easier. It is refusing to become what tried to destroy you. He wanted control. What he gave me instead was clarity. And clarity, once earned, cannot be taken away. The life he couldn't touch. Time did what court orders could not. It exposed the difference between someone who parents for appearance and someone who parents for presence. Months passed. Then a year. The chaos he once injected into every corner of our lives slowly lost its power. School events became ordinary instead of battlegrounds. My phone stopped tightening my chest when notifications appeared. I realized one evening, while folding laundry and listening to my children argue over music, that fear was no longer my background noise. He still existed on the edges, bound by rules he resented, but his reach had shortened. That was the true consequence he never anticipated. Control requires access, and access had been limited to paper schedules and supervised rooms. Meanwhile, our home filled with routines that didn't revolve around anticipating his moods. Weekends meant pancakes. Evenings meant homework at the table, laughter spilling into bedtime. He could accuse, complain, and posture all he wanted, but he could no longer rewrite what was happening right in front of us. The truth circulates. Stories have a way of correcting themselves. People who once avoided me began asking quiet questions. Teachers treated me with open respect. Administrators stopped entertaining anonymous concerns. Even some who had doubted me before offered careful apologies. I didn't demand them. Vindication did not need witnesses anymore. The truth had embedded itself into records, behavior, and outcomes. He, on the other hand, became increasingly isolated. When manipulation fails repeatedly, it stops attracting allies. People grow tired of drama without substance. He spoke about injustice constantly, but nothing in his life changed except his audience shrinking. I watched this from a distance, not with satisfaction but with understanding. Lies consume their creators eventually. The moment I let go. The final shift didn't come from another hearing or confrontation. It came from a realization during a therapy session meant for my child that ended up healing me too. I was asked when I stopped needing him to be exposed. The answer surprised me. I didn't need it anymore. Exposure had already happened in the only place that mattered. My children knew who showed up. They knew who listened. They knew who made them feel safe without conditions. The rest was noise. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped rehearsing defenses in my head. Letting go was not forgiveness. It was freedom. What I would tell anyone still silent. If there is one truth I carry forward, it is this. Documenting your reality is not paranoia. It is protection. Leaving does not make you cruel. Staying does not make you strong. Strength is choosing safety even when fear tells you the cost is too high. I once believed patience could heal cruelty. I was wrong. Accountability does that when it is enforced and sustained. He tried to take my children to prove I was nothing without his approval. Instead, he proved something else entirely. That control cannot survive truth. That performance collapses under consistency. That justice, when it finally arrives, does not shout. It settles. And in that settled space, life grows again. The day it stopped defining me. There was no announcement when it happened. No dramatic moment where everything clicked into place. It arrived quietly, the way healing often does. I was standing in a grocery store aisle, comparing prices, when I realized I had gone an entire morning without thinking about him, the court, or the past. My mind was occupied with ordinary things, dinner plans, a school project, whether we needed more laundry detergent. That was when I understood that survival had shifted into living. For a long time, every decision I made carried his shadow. Even after winning, I measured my choices by how defensible they were instead of how joyful they felt. That day, something loosened. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to a judge. Not to strangers. Not even to myself. Rebuilding without apology. I stopped explaining my boundaries. I stopped softening my voice to make others comfortable. Peace doesn't require permission. I rebuilt my life deliberately, not as a reaction to what I escaped, but as a declaration of what I deserved. I took a better job with steadier hours. I decorated our home with colors chosen for warmth, not neutrality. I taught my children that love does not make you afraid and that respect does not demand silence. We talked openly about emotions, about mistakes, about accountability. I refused to raise them believing control was affection. That choice felt revolutionary in its simplicity. The consequences he couldn't escape. While my life stabilized, his continued to circle the same patterns. Required counseling turned into missed sessions. Supervised visits remained supervised. Complaints were noted, not entertained. The system he tried to exploit now recognized him clearly. It wasn't vengeance that held him there. It was consistency. Institutions respond to patterns just like people do. He had written his own record through repeated behavior. Every attempt to bend rules only reinforced why they existed. Watching that unfold taught me something powerful. You do not need to destroy someone who insists on undoing themselves. The children bloom. The most undeniable proof of everything came from my children. Their teachers commented on confidence. Their laughter became louder, less guarded. They spoke about feelings without flinching. One evening, as I tucked them in, one of them asked why things were calmer now. I answered honestly, but gently. I said we were safe, and safety lets people breathe. That answer stayed with me. Safety is not just the absence of danger. It is the presence of care. The story I no longer carry. I once thought this story would define me forever. The toxic marriage. The courtroom fight. The fear of losing my children. I understand now that it defined a chapter, not a life. Stories like mine don't end with revenge. They end with release. He wanted power. I chose peace. He tried to erase me. I rebuilt myself in plain sight. And though the scars remain, they no longer ache. They remind me of something far more important than what I survived. They remind me of what I protected. When the fear finally left. Fear does not disappear all at once. It loosens its grip gradually, testing whether it is still needed. For a long time, I woke up braced for impact, expecting an email, a notice, a problem that would pull me back into defense mode. Then one morning, I realized I had slept through the night without dreams of courtrooms or raised voices. My body had learned what my mind was still catching up to. The danger had passed. I trusted the quiet instead of questioning it. That trust felt like the final step out of survival. Teaching without speeches. I never sat my children down for a dramatic lesson about toxic behavior. I taught them by example. By listening when they spoke. By apologizing when I was wrong. By respecting their boundaries. They learned that love does not come with threats or conditions. They learned that authority does not excuse cruelty. Watching them grow into emotionally aware humans felt like rewriting history, not erasing it, but transforming it into something better. The space he left behind. The less influence he had, the more space opened in our lives. Space for friendships. Space for joy. Space for rest. I noticed how much energy had once gone into anticipating his reactions. Without that drain, life felt lighter. I filled the space intentionally, with people who showed up without agendas, with routines that nurtured instead of depleted. I did not miss the chaos. I did not miss the adrenaline. I missed nothing that hurt. No need for closure. People often talk about closure as if it requires a conversation, an apology, an acknowledgement of harm. I learned that closure can be unilateral. It can be a decision made quietly, without the other person's participation. I did not need him to understand the damage he caused. I needed to understand that it was real and undeserved. That understanding closed the door permanently. The life that followed. Life did not become perfect. It became honest. Problems arose, but they were proportionate, solvable, free of manipulation. I handled them with a steadiness I once doubted I possessed. The strength I gained was not dramatic. It was durable. It carried me forward without resentment weighing me down. What this story really is. This is not a story about winning against someone else. It is a story about refusing to lose yourself. It is about choosing truth over fear, documentation over denial, consistency over chaos. He tried to take my children to maintain control. Instead, he lost the only thing that ever mattered: influence. And I gained something far more valuable than victory. A life where tomorrow is not something to survive, but something to live. The moment I stopped looking back, there came a day when someone mentioned his name casually without knowing the history, and my body did not react. No tightening. No flash of anger. No need to correct the narrative. The name passed through the air like any other sound, unremarkable. That was when I understood that healing is not about forgetting what happened. It is about remembering without reliving. I no longer carried the instinct to defend my past. It had already been validated in every way that mattered. Reclaiming identity. For years, I had been introduced as someone's partner, then someone's ex, then someone fighting a custody battle. I slowly reclaimed being just myself. I rediscovered interests that had nothing to do with survival. Music I liked without explaining why. Hobbies I abandoned because they were once criticized. I allowed myself to enjoy things without guilt. That freedom felt radical. Identity, I learned, is not fixed. It expands when fear recedes. Strength that stays quiet. People sometimes told me I was strong, and for a long time, that word made me uncomfortable. Strength had meant endurance without choice. Now it meant discernment. Knowing when to speak and when to walk away. Knowing that not every injustice requires my energy. The loudest strength I ever demonstrated was choosing peace consistently, even when drama tried to invite me back in. Watching the pattern end. Eventually, his attempts grew infrequent, then rare, then non-existent. Not because he changed, but because the pattern no longer produced results. Systems adapt. People adapt. Manipulation fails when it meets immovable boundaries. I watched the pattern dissolve without satisfaction or regret. Indifference replaced vigilance. That indifference was earned. What my children will never know. There are parts of this story my children will never fully know. Not because I am hiding the truth, but because they do not need to carry pain that no longer serves them. They will know they were protected. They will know they were believed. They will know they grew up in a home where love did not require shrinking. That knowledge will shape them more than any courtroom memory ever could. The peace that remained. Peace stayed. Not fragile peace, but practiced peace. The kind built through routine, honesty, and self-trust. The kind that does not collapse at the first challenge. I learned that peace is not passive. It is maintained intentionally, every day, by refusing to tolerate what once felt unavoidable. The ending he never wrote. He once told me no court would ever choose me. He believed authority belonged to him. In the end, the authority was mine all along. Not because a judge said so, but because I reclaimed it piece by piece. This story does not end with his regret or apology. It ends with my certainty. With children who sleep peacefully. with a future that is not negotiated under threat, and with the quiet knowledge that justice does not always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like freedom that lasts, the life that stayed. There is a kind of ending that doesn't announce itself as an ending. It simply continues, steady and intact, long after the conflict has burned itself out. That is the ending I live in now. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just whole. Mornings still begin early. Lunches still need packing. Shoes still go missing. But none of it feels heavy anymore. Responsibility without fear feels different. It feels chosen. I no longer brace for disruption or rehearse explanations in my head. The life we built held. It held through time, through silence, through the absence of conflict. And that was how I knew it was real. What remains when everything else falls away? This story is not about revenge in the way people expect. There was no public humiliation, no grand apology, no moment where the world finally turned and applauded. Revenge would have kept me tethered to the same darkness that once consumed my days. What happened instead was justice, quiet and firm, doing what justice is meant to do, protecting the innocent and limiting harm. He tried to take my children to reclaim control, to punish me for choosing freedom, to rewrite history in his favor. What he did instead was expose the truth he had worked so hard to hide. The lies collapsed under their own weight. The patterns revealed themselves. The systems saw clearly because I stayed consistent, documented carefully, and refused to disappear. What remains now is not bitterness. It is clarity. I know who I am without defense. I know what love looks like when it is not conditional. I know that strength does not come from enduring cruelty, but from refusing to normalize it. My children are growing in a home where their voices matter, where mistakes are corrected without fear, where love is steady and unthreatened. They will not remember courtrooms or accusations. They will remember safety. And that is the greatest justice I could have ever asked for. If there is one truth this story leaves behind, it is this. When someone tries to take everything from you using lies, the most powerful response is to live so truthfully that nothing they say can survive. I did not win by destroying him. I won by protecting what mattered, by becoming undeniable, and by building a future that no longer includes fear. The court did not save me. Exposure did not save me. I saved myself by choosing truth every single day. And in doing so, I gave my children something far more lasting than victory. I gave them peace. If this story resonated with you, remember this. Silence does not mean weakness, and walking away does not mean you lost. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is protect your peace and stand in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. If you or someone you love is facing manipulation or control, know that consistency, documentation, and courage can change everything. Thank you for listening to this story. If you believe truth always finds a way to rise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because more stories like this deserve to be heard.